Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een, amma ba'd. So today we're going to be discussing economic transactions. This is known as al-buyu', the entire section of buyu', or it's known as the fiqh of mu'amalat. Mu'amalat meaning transactions between two people. So this is very important actually. Some scholars have put this section before marriage. And the reason why they put it before marriage and divorce and all of the family matters is because the rules pertaining to marriage mainly apply to people who are married or people who are about to get married. But economic transactions apply to everyone regardless of whether they're married or not. So in fact, it could be argued that this is actually more important for people to know than even the marriage rules. Now the reason why I put it afterwards and I chose to delay it is not because it's less important, but because it's more difficult to understand. This is actually a very difficult section to understand because almost all the books on Islamic law are talking about transactions which used to take place in the past, and now today's economy has radically changed the way in which we do economics. So it's very difficult to select which parts are relevant and how they can be applied, and probably most Muslim scholars will admit to you that this is their weakest subject. Is Islamic economics. It's one of their weakest subjects because it's the most difficult, because you need to understand the Islamic law and read all those books, and it's difficult enough in and of itself, and then you need to understand the modern economy and the modern economic system, and then combine the two together. So that requires basically two expertises, to be expert in both. So it's very, very difficult, and unfortunately this is something where more people need to focus on, because you have to really have a good mixture of both. So I'm not claiming to be an expert either. I've not solved it myself, but inshallah we're going to try to make it as relevant as we can. So economic transactions. What is an economic transaction? Remember, it's basically, so you have to understand that an essential and absolute necessity in society is that people have to have property ownership. There has never been a concept like communism in Islam, and there never can be. Communism being the most extreme form of saying that no one owns anything. There's no such thing as ownership of anything. Right? So when it comes to property, every society outside of the few communistic-like communities, or at least the ones who envisioned a potential communism, that people will always own property. And that means if you own property, you have to define how the property is owned, and you have to define how property is transferred to somebody else. So this tablet belongs to me, right? So if I'm going to be transferring it over to you, there needs to be certain rules and regulations in place that dictates how this is going to get transferred to you and what you're going to transfer back to me if you transfer anything back to me, so that we exchange our property ownership rights. So this is very essential to every society, because you have to have property ownership, otherwise society cannot function. People will not be able to survive. You cannot do everything yourself. You cannot grow all of your own food. You cannot do all of your own work. You cannot build your own house. You cannot go and get your own water. People will have to have a division of labor in a society. And that's why you have property ownership. So you exchange either rights, or you exchange privileges, or you exchange items so that society can function. So Islam has come and put some of these regulations in place to make sure that this exchange of ownership, this exchange of property, is being done on a fair and just basis so that no one is getting abused. Okay, so that's what we're talking about today. So let's start with the basic condition of a sale. A sale referring to the transaction of property. Whether you can do two types of sale. There's three hypothetical things that you could do. there's currency, right? When we talk about monetary instruments, there's currency like gold coins, silver coins, cash, bank exchanges, whatever it is. So there's currency, and then there are items. Okay? So potentially in an exchange, what can you exchange? The normal exchange would be you exchange currency for an item. Right? I'm going to give you $10. You give me, your laptop. That would be a horrible deal. But I mean, I'm just saying, $100 and you give me your laptop, right? So currency for exchange for an item. You could also exchange item for item. I'll trade you, my iPhone for your Samsung, right? Because Samsung is better. No, I'm just kidding. I say iPhone is better, right? Whatever it is, right? Exchange something, across the board. Or you could actually be exchanging currency for currency, right? Now we're going to talk about the dangers involved in that and why Islam has actually put more restrictions on that. But these are three potential exchanges, right? Item for an item for a currency, or currency for a currency. So we have to look at all of these things. These are what we talk about sale. Meaning when you say sale, meaning you're exchanging two things, right? So that's pretty much a sale. So for a basic sale that's going to be taking place, basic transaction between two people or two companies or whatever it is, there has to be an offer and an acceptance. So somebody is offering the sale and the other person is accepting, and this has to be according to mutual consent. So basically what Islam is trying to say is that whenever you're going to exchange properties, it has to be done by mutual consent. It's very similar to marriage. We've already talked about marriage, right? So when you get married, both parties have to agree to the marriage. Now, how do you express your agreement? That's basically what we're talking about here. So in the marriage, how did you express your agreement? With the statement, there's an offer and there's an acceptance. Exactly the same way, right? So it's like economics, same thing. So there's an offer. So you know what? I'm going to sell you this phone. I can sell you this phone for $100. That's the offer. And the acceptance is, okay, done. It's a deal. I'm going to buy your phone for $100. Okay, so there has to be, so the mutual consent comes through an expression of an offer and an acceptance. Now what is an expression? An expression can be verbal, it can be written, it can be even implied. Right? So when you go, so this is kind of, making this relevant. When you go to the store, right? You go to your local grocery store and you pick something off the shelf and they're scanning it out at the checkout, and sometimes there's not even a talk, right? You don't even talk. You simply see the amount there, slide your credit card, receipt comes out, they say, thank you, have a nice day. All they asked you pretty much was, how are you doing today? And then you say, yeah, fine. And then the rest of the thing was, have a nice day. There was no communication. You didn't sign anything. You didn't say anything. But that context of swiping the groceries, seeing the thing, you going and putting your credit card or whatever it is in there, that's an expression of offer and acceptance. Even though, it's not verbalized or it's not written or something like that, it's pretty clear that context is by mutual consent. So it's quite flexible. As long as there's something that clearly indicates that there's been an offer and an acceptance. So the thing is, that register that's putting your grocery, putting your grocery bill for each item is showing you, right? If all of a sudden one of those items, you're scanning like some juice or something like that, and all of a sudden the juice comes out as $1,000. You stop and say, whoa, wait a minute. No, this is not acceptable. That's like the offer, and that's your rejection of the offer when you're looking at your receipt or whatever it is. So this can apply in any way. So it's actually very flexible. It's very fluid in Islam. The whole point of this is to make sure that it's being done by mutual consent. Nobody's forcing you or tricking you into making this transaction. Because once a transaction is made, it's very difficult to go back and say, you know what, I didn't agree to that. Now, when we go through most of these examples, I want you to take the example of a swap meet. Because this is how almost all transactions used to take place. Get the department store out of your mind. Okay, because department store has a specific return policy. They have all the legal rulings. When you walk in, they have the cash registers and everything. I want you to think of the most primitive type of transactions. You are literally working at a swap meet. Okay, somebody puts you in charge of a table. Right? Let's say you're working in a masjid and you're selling something. Someone puts you in charge of a table. You're going to be collecting cash into your little primitive cash box. Right? And you're going to be selling some items. Right? There's no written policy. There's no return policy specified. You're just sitting at the table and you're selling some of your stuff. What are the Islamic rules that are going to be involved in these transactions? So just think along those lines. And it's actually very relevant because we have a lot of swap meets. And when you're going to sell an item on eBay, you're going to sell an item on Craigslist, what are you going to be doing? You're not a company, so you don't have all this legal documentation and everything. Either you sell it or you don't sell it, or you cancel the problem. When two people get into an argument, I didn't agree to this and you ripped me off and all of that. You need to know what to do in all of these cases. Okay, so this is what makes it quite relevant actually. I used to think, this is not relevant because we have department stores. But actually, people selling their own stuff now with Craigslist and all the other ways of selling it, it became very relevant again. It's very, very relevant. So it's important to know all of this. So mutual consent. Mutual consent from both parties to the sale and to the purchase, depending if you're the seller or the purchaser. Unambiguous language must be used. Just like in marriage we talked about, you shouldn't say, you know what, oh, I'm offering to marry you. And then someone says, okay, I will marry you. That's ambiguous. That's ambiguous language. You could say, oh, I meant future. I didn't mean now. So it has to be clear. So let's take an example. Somebody's selling something, and you're walking through like a swap meet, and somebody says, you know what, I will sell you this for, it's listed for 15, I'll give it to you for $10. And the person says, you know what, that sounds good. Is that a clear statement? It's not a clear statement. Now if that guy in the swap meet said, hey, you already bought it. You already said that you bought it. So the other person says, no, I didn't say it clearly. If somebody comes along and says, okay, you know what, this thing that's being sold, I'll give it to you for $10. And you say, you know what, I'll take it. Right? Is that clear language? Not 100%. So it depends on your custom. If you say, I'll take it, does that mean future tense? I will take it, or I'm taking it? See? So again, so someone can argue that's literally, I meant the future tense, and they say, well, according to our custom, so it has to be something even clearer than that, right? To make sure that there's no differentiation. So if somebody says, I'll give you this for $10, and he says, sold. Sold is as clear as you can get, right? So you have to be careful about the custom. Why? Because, why is this important? This nitpicking is important because what causes bigger disputes than financial transactions? Right? Nothing causes worse disputes than financial transactions. This leads to wars, right? Because money is considered to be property is very important for people. So if somebody goes and tries to say, no, you bought it for this and we agreed upon this, say, no, a fight will break out, can potentially break out. So it's very important to take this very seriously. This is not nitpicking or something like that. This is nitpicking for a good reason, because this can lead to a lot of problems. So the wording must be unambiguous. It needs to be very clear. Now, when you're negotiating a price, right? You're going back and forth. I'll take it for $10. No, $14. I'll give you $12 for it. No. Okay, $13 is the lowest I'm willing to go. So you're negotiating a price, right? The price will be cancelled if something interrupts the transaction. So what that means is you're negotiating a price and you say, 10, okay, 13 is the lowest I'm willing to go. $13, huh? Okay, let me think about it. And then the person, walks away, goes to another place and say, how much are you selling that for? So, I'll never go below 15. Okay. Then you go back to the other guy, okay, I'll take it for 13. Now if the guy changed his mind, no, I changed my mind now. No, I'm not giving it to you for 13, it's $15. If you want it, that guy's selling for 15, I'm also selling for $14.99. I'm giving you 1 cent discount. Alright, so if you want it, you take it. Say, no, you promised, you said 13. So you have to be held accountable. You said 13 and you're a Muslim and you're a man of your word, you need to honor this transaction. Do you need to honor the transaction? No, because the deal was interrupted. Now what interrupts a deal? If you turn around, or if you walk away, or if you go and you check somebody else's item, the deal is interrupted. If you don't interrupt the deal, and you're standing right there and the person gave the offer of 13, they have to honor that offer. Because that's a word. You don't throw it out there and say, okay, you know what, I'll give it to you for 13. And when you're bargaining, and then all of a sudden say, okay, sold, done. And you take out the money, guy says, no, you know, I've changed my mind. Or somebody else comes along and says, no, I would have given you 15. Oh, cancelled, give me the 15. You can't do that. You can't do that. The sale is final, and you're not allowed to retract. According to Imam Shafi'i, he has a different opinion though. He says you can retract as long as the two sellers have not departed. According to the Hanafi school, you cannot retract. Okay, you cannot retract, and there's a hadith that's been interpreted in two different ways. But technically, to abide by a word, I think it's better, it's safer, that you know what, we should honor our words and all that. And we should stick with this, that once you make an agreement, that's an agreement that you've made. Shouldn't have made the agreement in the first place. You are bound to that agreement. Okay, you're bound to that contract. So once the offer is accepted, the sale is considered final, and it cannot be canceled. So again, we're not talking about your department store return policy and all of that. We're talking about an average sale. You go and you're trying to sell, you know, your TV on Craigslist because you realize that it's messing up your family and you want to get the TV out of your home. So you go and you find a buyer. I'm just throwing some little things in there. So you find a buyer, right? And then all of a sudden you go and you tell them, so look, this TV is there. Right? So you negotiated, and he said, okay, $50, it's sold. I'm getting rid of this thing. I need to just get it out of my house so, you know, my children can start reading some more books or something like that. And now all of a sudden, you start thinking, okay, well, you know, I could have gotten more money for that. Someone else texts you and say, hey, I'm willing to give you 70. Can you cancel or not? Same thing, you cannot cancel. Once you've made that agreement, you've made the agreement should be honored. Okay? So you don't have the option to cancel. However, there's a few ways in which you can cancel if you stipulate it. So there are 3 ways to cancel or have a return policy. And this is known as khiyar. Okay, khiyar in Arabic. It's basically the option to cancel the contract, or it's like a return policy, if you want to put it that way. Why does Islam have this return policy or have this cancellation policy in place? It's to protect both parties. Because if you don't have these type of policies, then one side can get harmed over the other. And Islam wants to make sure that this, you know, harm does not accrue to either side. It's very just and balanced to make sure there's no abuse of transactions. So there's 3 ways in which you can have a proper return policy. One of them is a stipulated option. Okay, this is called khiyar ash-shart. Meaning you have stipulated an option as part of the contract that there will be a return policy. And this is what all the major department stores do, right? Some of them give you a 90-day return policy. Some of you give a 30-day return policy. Some of them, like Costco, used to give you an unlimited lifetime return policy. Then they realized their mistake, and people are bringing back like 7-year-old TVs, you know, and returning them and getting a brand new one. They realize, okay, this is not going to work anymore. Let's bring it back to something, you know, sane. In this case, you stipulate an option, there's no problem. So you can go ahead and say, you know what, you're selling, you know, that TV or that phone or whatever to the guy you meet, you know, online, and you're selling it to him in the parking lot, and you say, you know what, we're gonna go ahead, I'm gonna give you a 7-day return policy. If you don't like it, you can return it back to me. You know, on eBay, when you sell something, you can put, you know, 7-day return policy. I'll take it back. You pay for the shipping, but I'll take it back if you don't like the item. So you can do that, and there's no limit. So this is the reason why this is important, because some Muslim scholars have put a limit. You can only do it for this many days or this many days. Generally, there should not be any limit. Okay, so there's no limit. You can put whatever you want. You want to put a 1-year return policy? Put a 1-year return policy. Now this policy, Islam is very flexible. This policy can be put by anybody. So the buyer can put the policy and the seller can put the policy. Usually it's always the seller, usually it's the buyer, right? The buyer gets the right to return. But technically the seller can even get the right to return. So you're selling your phone and say, you know what, I'm selling you this but on one condition. The condition is I have a 7-day period. I get 1 week to decide if I want to take it back from you or not. So the seller can actually say, I want, perhaps, I'm going to go and buy another phone. And if I don't like the other phone, I want my old phone back. So my condition is, I can cancel the policy within a week as well as you. You can return it, or you can't return it, but I can cancel the policy. There's a flexibility. So if you stipulate any type of option to cancel, it can be done from the buyer, or it can be done from the seller, and it can be done for any amount of time that's reasonable. Don't do these lifetime return policies or something like that. You're gonna cause yourself problems. But the conditions for the policy is that there has to be a fixed period of time. It needs to be specified. So you have to specify exactly in detail what it is. You can't just say, don't leave it open-ended. So you say, you know what, and you can return the product if you want. You didn't give him a time. So if you didn't give a time limit, what's going to happen after 3 months comes back? You said I can return the product. I didn't mean that. So, well, you didn't say that. It needs to be specified in order to prevent problems. So why would this happen? This happens on a regular basis, actually. In traditional societies, even in other traditional transactions, we do this all the time. So you go to like someone who's making a dress, and you say, you know what, okay, or you're buying a dress, let's say. You're in a bazaar or something like that, and you say, you know what, look, I'm going to buy this dress from you, but it's for my daughter, and this dress needs to fit. So if it doesn't fit, my daughter is coming and flying in town, next week. If it doesn't fit, I'm going to come back and return it. And they say, okay, no problem. If it doesn't fit, you can come back and return it. That's the option to cancel. So if you go home and say, oh, the dress, didn't work out, it didn't fit really properly, you come back, you have a right to cancel. If somebody comes back and say, you know what, we just didn't like the dress. We just, my uncle came and my uncle started commenting and said, it doesn't look really nice. So you wanted to go back and return it. Technically, you're not allowed to do that because the option that you specified was if it doesn't fit. So you have to honor your statements in terms of your transaction. Because usually you don't get a return policy from a bazaar or like a flea market or a swap meet or something like that. So we have to be clear about that. Now, what happens if there is an option to cancel? The buyer takes the product, right? But then the buyer loses the product. It either completely is messed up or he damages the product. So there's a defect. So you go and you buy a phone and you have a return policy, and then you say you can return it in a week, no problem. And then you go and you drop the phone and you crack the screen. Now, you had the right to return the phone, but now you've messed up the product. So the question is, do you lose your right to return, or do you maintain your right to return with an adjustment? So you lose the right to return? Right. So you see the difficulty involved, right? Because if you lose the right to return, then you've just given up your right for an accident that you've done. And that was supposed to be your right. Okay? And if you don't give up your right, then who's going to be, so you're going to be harmed. And if you don't lose your right and you can still return the product, who's going to be harmed? The seller. Right? So what do you do in this case? So you got some options. You have option, either you compensate the buyer. If you lose the entire item, you have to compensate the buyer with an identical item, right? When you're returning it, or with the value. So let's say you crack a screen on a phone, right? How much does it cost to get the screen fixed? Let's say $100, right? So you go back and you go to the place and you say, you know what? Either I can get it fixed for you, or I'm going to give you $100. I'm going to return this, get my $400 back, and you can deduct $100. So I only get $300 because I cracked the screen. And to fix the screen, it costs $100, and it's going to literally be like brand new. As long as the buyer is willing, and he's willing to, has consent to do that, you have the right to go and return that as well. Okay? The seller, sorry, if the seller, yeah. So as long as the seller is willing, and it's something, something fair. Now, if the seller is just being like a punk and he's saying, no, I will not take it back. You dropped it, that's your problem. No returns anymore, and that's it. If there's a level of unfairness, you have to go to a judge and basically, get something resolved. But you still have that right, even if you've damaged it. Because the damage doesn't take away your right unless the product is completely messed up. So let's say you go and you buy some coffee, right? And then you go and you make the coffee. And what are you going to do? Return it back to the owner? Here's a cup of coffee, and you give me some water back because it was my water and it was your coffee. So I'm returning the coffee part, you give me some water and we're going to return this back. It's not going to work that way, right? As long as the item can still be salvaged, can still be used and resold or whatever it is, even with the loss in value, you can take the loss in value and you can put it back. So there's an option to cancel. Second option is option which is subject to examination. So the first option is actually very clear, very rational. The second one is something more specific to Islam, which you will not find other people having it in their laws. Okay, this is known as khiyar al-ru'ya, an option that is subject to examination of the product, or looking at the product, or analyzing the product. Okay, so why is this allowed? You're allowed in Islam to buy something that you have not seen, right? And this is actually, normally Islam is very protective, right? They don't want to put, uncertain, dangerous transactions and everything. But this is so common. We always buy things which we have not seen. So somebody describes something to you, I got a phone and looks like this, it's this model, and it's used, but it's in pretty good condition. You haven't seen it, but it's been described to you, right? So are you allowed to buy that? Yes, you're allowed to buy that. But as a safeguard, the Sharia Islamic law says that you have automatically the option to return that product upon your inspection of it. So the moment since you've never looked at it and you just had a description, once you look at it, if the description is not properly matching the actual product, according to your custom and culture, according to, something that makes common sense, if it's not matching properly and you say, no, this is not what I had envisioned, because this phone is supposed to be black, and it came white instead, and I wanted the black one, and that's what I wanted, and you didn't tell me that, and almost all models of this phone happen to be black, and you all of a sudden found this one random white version, and I didn't want that one. The moment you see it, you have the option to cancel. Now if the seller comes and says, no, this is not fair, the transaction was done, I described to you the product, it was this type of phone with this type of thing and everything. Now that you're looking at it, you're going to tell me that you have a problem with it just because of the color or whatever it is. You have the right to cancel that transaction, if there's a sufficient level of discrepancy between the description and between the product itself. So let's talk about what is the reason for that, right? You get an automatic right to cancel the transaction. For what reason? In order to prevent deception. Okay, so Islam is trying to prevent deception from taking place as much as it possibly can. That's if the description has led to some uncertainty about the product. So let's take an example. This is not extreme, so it should never be taken to the extreme. So if you see part of an item, so let's say you go, you're at a swap meet again, and you buy a sheet, right? Like a bed sheet, for example, and the bed sheet is folded up and it's inside the plastic. Okay? So you look at it and let's say half the plastic is showing the bed sheet and the other half on the bottom is not showing the rest of it and happen to have a design, right? So you looked at part of it through the plastic and the other one has a piece of cardboard showing the name and the brand and everything. Following? Right? So now you go home and you buy it, and you saw that the design pattern was like checkered and squares and all of that, and then you open it up and you look and you say, the design on the bottom part, that's not exactly like the design on the top part, it kind of moves a little bit, the squares are not the way that I wanted it to be. Right? If you didn't specify a return policy, you've looked at enough of this product to figure out what kind of product it is, you don't get the option to return unless you've stipulated it. Because you only have to see that, look, this is a sheet and this is kind of, it has a design. You should have looked at it in more detail before buying it, so you don't get an automatic right to buy it. If you go and you buy a pack of 3 shirts, like undershirts for example, you buy a 3-pack and all 3 are different, right? And you look at the pack and you say, okay, well, you know what? I can see the front one, looks good. I can see the back one, looks good. Oh, 3-pack, you get 3 shirts, great. So you go home, you buy it, you come home, and then you open it up, you had a black one in the front, nice. You had a white one in the back, it's very nice. And then you open up and the middle shirt is pink. And you're like, okay, that is not what I had in mind. That's a false description of this product. You have an automatic right to return that product, whether or not it was stipulated. So the guy says, well, didn't you see the sign? The sign said no returns, no refunds. You have an automatic right to return that according to Islam. So if you're a Muslim seller, you have to honor taking that back, because that's a level of deception that the person could not see and he could not tell just by looking at the item what it is, and it's at an extent where it actually impacts your decision. It would have impacted your decision to buy that product if you knew there was a pink shirt in the middle, right? So that's why you have an automatic opportunity for return. Even if they say no returns, they have to accept that return. So that's what it means by automatic right. Okay, so this is option number 2. Option number 3 is option to cancel subject to a defect. So if there's a defect in the product, this is called khiyarul aib. If there's a defect in the product, you automatically get a return policy, right? Now we need to be careful about this. So you have to be cautious. So there's a difference between this one and the previous one. So if you find a defect in the item, you have the right, if you want to keep the product, you can keep it. If you want to return the product, you can return it. What you cannot do is you cannot deduct the value yourself and then, continue the transaction. Now let me give you an example where someone would try to do that. And just think, I can guarantee you there are people who try to do this on a regular basis. So let's say somebody buys a phone, right? You buy a phone for $100. You take it home. And then all of a sudden, you see that the screen was scratched. And the scratch screen was like, let's say, $20, $30, $40 defect or something like that. So you say, you know what? This is a big defect. And if you go to the manufacturer to get it repaired, it's going to cost this much money, plus shipping, plus that, $40 is going to cost to get fixed. So what do? You tell the guy, you know what? I'm not paying you. You bought it on credit. You told the guy you're going to pay him tomorrow, and you can do that. You say, you know what? We already made the transaction. I'm keeping this phone though. Although it's damaged, it was your fault that it was damaged. I'm only going to pay you $60 now. I'm deducting that $40 and that's exactly what you deserve. Right? Can you imagine somebody doing that? Oh, definitely, because I've seen it before. Right? It happens. But you cannot do that. Islamically, you don't have a right to do that because you're determining the value of the defect without mutual consent. And you're not allowed to do that. So you have the option. Either, if the guy says, yes, deduct $40 and keep it, you can do that. But if he doesn't agree, either you have to return the product or you keep the product as is, but you get a right to return the product if you want. Okay? So what is a defect? Anything which results in a decrease in the price of a product according to local custom, that's a defect. All right, so you go and you buy a phone and all of a sudden you're looking around. There's a little tiny thing right there. It's like a little tiny thing. See, if you look really closely under the sunlight, do you see that right there? No, this is not fair. I'm returning this product. Something which is a real defect, that's actually considered to lower the value of the product, that's going to be considered a defect. So you see, like you buy a shirt and there's like one little thread coming out from the side. So you know what? No, I'm canceling this transaction. I'm returning it. You don't get the same return policy for a defect that's not really considered according to your custom to be a defect. So you have to define what is a defect. Now the problem is, if the buyer damages the product. So you buy the product, it had a little crack on the screen, and then you drop the phone. And you ruin the entire screen, or you ruin the back of this thing. So now what do? You had the guy damage the product first, and now you damage the product further. So what do you do now? See the problem is, somebody's right is being sacrificed here. So how do you strike a compromise between the two of them? So if something like that happens, and it's clear that the defect came from that person, and then you damage it even more, you have an option to return it and pay the damages, right? If the buyer agrees to that. So the buyer can agree and say, you know what, my defect was $10, your defect was $50. So I'm going to go and deduct, $40 or whatever it is. So you pay for your defect, I pay for my defect, and that's how we're going to do this. Or you receive a partial refund. You say, my defect was equivalent to about $10. Fair estimation. So I'll go and return $10 to you, and you keep the rest of the phone because I don't want a broken phone. And the buyer can say that. I don't want your cracked phone. I can't resell this. I don't have time to get it fixed. So if my little scratch was a $10 value, I'm going to give you $10 back. And that's the way we're going to negotiate this contract. Okay? Now, the last thing is, you're allowed to, this is really good for car salesmen, especially, you're allowed to stipulate immunity from defects. I'm selling this product as is. If it doesn't work, it's not my problem. As long as you stipulate that, you don't have to declare any defects. So if somebody goes and says, you know what, does this phone, really work in Southern California? Does it have any water damage? Does it have any this? Does it have any that? Say, look, I'm just selling as is. Whatever you want, you can buy. So you're not allowed to lie to the person, but if they ask you, you don't have to answer. And you say, look, this is a as-is sale. It's a pretty good phone. If you want to buy it, you can buy it. And when you say pretty good, it better be, pretty good. It better not be a brick or something like that. So you're allowed to do that. And if you do that, option is canceled. So if the person finds a defect, say, oh, this had water damage, and look, it had a scratch, and look, it had this. See the as is? The as is means as is, so you lost it. If you don't specifically state that you're selling as is, then they automatically have an option to return according to defects. That's why you'll see many stores, they specifically write it out, right? Everything is sold as it is, no return policy, nothing like that. We're not held accountable for whatever it is. That's your risk. Right? So usually when you sell something online or Craigslist or something like that, that's what you're buying. So you better test it out properly, you better check it and everything like that, unless it's coming with a return policy. So you're allowed to do that actually. The next thing is deferred payment. So is deferred payment allowed? Actually, we talked about that. So yes, deferred payment is allowed with the condition that you will specify a date that needs to be paid. You go and you sell somebody some, whatever, You tell someone, okay, you know what, I want you to, buy me this burger and I'll gladly pay you on Tuesday. And you say, okay, fine. Some people watch Popeye. Okay, so I'll pay you later. You have to specify the date, but it should be clear. Right? So if you say, I'll pay you on Tuesday. Which Tuesday? This Tuesday or the following Tuesday? Which Tuesday we're talking about? It needs to be clearly specified in order to prevent any dispute. So Islam is trying to prevent putting rules in place so that people are not going to start arguing. The clearer you make it, the less disputes there's going to be, right? So there's a level of clarity that Islam enforces to make sure that there's less disputes in the society, in the community. Okay, so deferred payment is allowed, and we're going to talk about interest soon. Okay, but the date must be specified. What are invalid transactions? So there are certain type of transactions which are considered invalid. There's a difference between forbidden and invalid. Invalid means that one, they're haram, so they're not allowed, and two, they don't even count as a transaction. It's like the property never transferred over in the first place. So there's a difference, right? If somebody says, well, I know interest is haram, right? So if I go and I gave somebody some money, and then they went and they paid me back, and we did this, last month, I know it was haram and everything, so technically, is that invalid? If it was invalid transaction, that means you go and grab the guy's money and you take it back, and you say, that was my money because this transaction never happened. But prohibited means you're sinful for it, but the transaction took place. So what are invalid transactions? Okay, let's take a look. Number one, selling anything that is prohibited for Muslims. So selling pork, for example, is an invalid transaction. So if you go and you have a bacon burger, right, and you're going and selling to a Muslim, say, here, I'm selling you this bacon burger, that's considered invalid transaction. You do not do this, right, generally, hopefully, inshallah, but you're selling wine, right? So technically, selling wine, Islamically, when you have, a bunch of Muslims and everything, it's completely invalid transaction. So it's not only prohibited, it's invalid. The reason why it's invalid is because things that are prohibited for us, like wine and pork, they're considered to have no value in the eyes of a Muslim. Because they're prohibited. You're not allowed to sell it, you're not allowed to buy it, you're not allowed to do anything with it. So if it's prohibited to that level, the philosophy is, this has zero value in the eyes of a Muslim. It doesn't even have the value of 1 cent. Because you're not allowed to buy it, you're not allowed to sell it, you're not supposed to touch it, you're not supposed to pour it, you're not supposed to do anything with it. So what value does that thing have? Nothing. There's no value to it. So that's why it's an invalid transaction, because you're selling something that has no value. Okay, so that rarely, hopefully is rarely happening. When someone is actually selling that in a non-Muslim store or something like that, they shouldn't be selling it in the first place, but now it's different. So if you have a Muslim owner of a grocery store and he's selling alcohol and he's selling pork, does the transaction actually take place? Okay, from a theoretical perspective, no. From a practical perspective, yes, because the person who's buying it is going to go home and they're going to drink it and they paid the money and all of that. That money that they've received is prohibited for them. That money needs to be given in charity directly, and they need to stop selling. But if it was completely invalid, right, meaning that item still belongs to them, you're not supposed to own any of these products anyways. Right? So technically that's why you cannot sell something that you own in the first place. So this is more theoretical. Selling something which you don't own. This is number 2. You cannot sell something which you don't own and it doesn't count. Now this is more important, right? So let's say, for example, I'm leaving the masjid, I'm moving to another masjid, You want to buy this for $50? This is a really good microphone. I take the money and I go and I move to another place, right? The masjid has the right. So 1, it's haram what I've done because this is masjid property, right? 2, the masjid has the right when they see me to go and take $50 back from me. Or if they're going to pay me my last paycheck, for example, they have the right to deduct $50 from there. Because it's not only haram, it's invalid. Because I sold something that belonged to them, I didn't own it, so they have the right to literally do that. Okay, so understand the difference between valid and invalid. So if you try and do something, you try and sell something that you don't completely own, it's not your property, or you sell public property, right? Say, you know what? There's some really good, what's the fruit in the back? Pomegranate, yeah. We got some really good pomegranates in the back, I'll sell it to you $5 a piece. They're really good. You can take as many as you want. I'm going to sell you the pomegranates of the masjid property. It's public property, or it's masjid property, You can't sell something that you actually don't own. So it's not allowed, and it's invalid. So not when you say, well, okay, it's haram, I take the sin, I'm going to ask Allah for forgiveness. And then you keep the money. You're not allowed to do that. The money has to be returned, because it's completely invalid. You're not allowed to do that. Number 3 is, if you add a condition to the contract which limits the use of the good, its essential use, then the condition is invalid. So let's say you go and you sell somebody a house. You say, I'm going to sell you my house, but I maintain the right to go into that house anytime I want. I'm keeping the one master key. Right? It's your house, you bought it, but I can go in anytime I want. And I'm reserving that right for me. Right? The whole point of owning a house is so that you live in it. It's yours, you own it, you have all the privileges to it. If somebody says, I'm going to sell it to you, but I'm going to reserve some privileges for myself, they're not allowed to do that. That transaction is not valid, or the transaction is valid, but the condition becomes nullified, and they're not allowed to do that. Can you imagine somebody goes and sells a car, and you say, but you're not allowed to drive that car. I can drive the car, you own the car, but I'm going to be driving the car. We're not talking about rental. Right? So this is something that generally you won't have happening, but I'm telling you it can happen. It can happen because it happened to me when I was a kid. My brother sold me something. Very difficult. He sold me something and he's like, you can buy this, but you're not allowed to use it. And I really wanted it. And it's such a difficult decision, man. It's like, I really want it, but this is the only condition that's attached to it. Should I buy it or should I not buy it? So I don't even remember if I bought it or not, whatever it was. But you're not supposed to, this is not a valid transaction. You can't do that, actually. So it's like I'm going to sell you this bottle of water, but you're not allowed to drink the water. Right? You have to get my permission, but you're not allowed to drink. What's the point of having it then? Right? It doesn't do anything for you. So transfer of ownership automatically includes the transfer of privileges. Okay, that's what it means. The next level of invalid transactions are uncertain transactions, what is known as gharar. Transactions which have gharar or uncertainty. And this is a very important point because a lot of people aren't aware of this. And they need to be aware of this. So Islam has specified that there has to be a level of transparency in the price of the transaction and in the item of the transaction in order to prevent deception from taking place. Because if there's not enough transparency in either the price or in either the item, what's going to happen is one party can get harmed. So there has to be, Islam makes sure that there's going to be a level of transparency, and it sets a few rules to make sure that there's some limits. But when you have something very clear, it's clear and there's no ambiguity, then you don't need to know the specifics. You don't need to know the weight, you don't need to know the quantity or something like that. So let's take, for example, you buy a bag of dates. Right? You go to Medina, right? And you're buying a bag of dates. Or you see a bag of dates sitting there on the store, you pick it up and you buy it. You don't count the dates. The bag does not tell you how many dates are inside. The bag does not tell you the quantity or the weight. It does not tell you the volume. It doesn't tell you the measure. It doesn't tell you anything. All you're doing is you're seeing this bag. Right? Are you allowed to buy that bag? And is the seller allowed to sell that bag without weighing it or without telling you how many dates there are or something like that? Allowed or not allowed? It's allowed. It's allowed because there's not much room for deception here. Right? Because you can see the dates, you can see how big they are, you can kind of see approximately around what they are. You don't need to know the exact measure, and still you know what you're buying. And there's not really a room for deception. Unless there was some weird grapes in the middle or something like that. As long as there's nothing like that, they're all dates around. What you see is what you're getting. It's going to be fine. You're allowed to do that. You don't need to measure. You don't need to specify. So that's one example. Let's take another example. Well, why? Because you can see it through sight. You can see what you're buying. Let's take another example now. You have a whole bag of coins, mixed coins. Right? You have quarters, nickels, dimes, and pennies. And you say, now, I'm going to trade you this bag of coins for that bag of dates. Right? They say, well, what do you think? Right? So should we be able to do it? So there's a level, there's a room for deception here, right? Because I could have 10 quarters in here, or I could have only a few quarters. You can't tell by looking at it what's inside because it's all mixed around. So you got the owner thinking, you know what? If there's more quarters, then I'm actually making a lot of money. But if there's a lot of pennies, then I'm going to be losing a lot of money. There's uncertainty involved. So there's a room for deception, and therefore this is not allowed. This type of transaction is not allowed. It's completely invalidated. Right? And you can imagine somebody thinking, there's probably a lot of quarters in the middle, or there's a lot of pennies, so you decide what to do. So there's a level of deception, you're not allowed to do it. The type of payment must be specified as well. Okay? So that we're talking about the item itself. So the item needs to be specified to a certain extent where it's transparent enough that there's not going to be any deception involved. And that's the loose principle. And then you can go and start taking specific examples. Right? So this rule right here is going to apply to all modern transactions. When you're talking about stock market type transactions, when you're talking about modern means of finance, when you're talking about modern investments and securities and all of that, this rule is applying in all of those aspects as well. Right? So originally I wanted to go and mention all those detailed transactions and everything. There's no way we're going to ever finish this class. if we were to do that. So probably maybe sometime in the future we'll have another class on modern economic transactions. But now that you know the rule, you can kind of understand where to apply it if you understand the modern transactions properly. And if you don't, then be careful of trying to apply the rule. But you know the underlying reason for the rule. The type of payment, number two, the type of payment should be specified. So what is the type of payment? So if you say, for example, I'm going to sell you, this pointer, this, laser pointer for 30. You say, okay, 30, that's done, sold. Right? And then you say, I meant, the person said I was going to buy it for 30 pesos. So no, $30. No, I was thinking pesos, so I'm going to give you Mexican pesos instead. That's not sufficient. You can't do that. You say, oh no, I was going to give you Canadian dollars. Right? That's not sufficient. So you basically go with the currency of the land. The currency needs to be specified to a level of detail as well. Now this used to be more prevalent in the past when you're talking about gold coins. So if somebody says, I'm going to give you 2 dinar, or I'm going to give you 2 gold coins. Which gold coins? The Roman gold coins, or the Syrian gold coins, or the Abbasid gold coins, or the Persian gold coins? They all have different measures, right? So gold coin doesn't mean anything, right? So if somebody says, I want to get married, say, well, how much dowry do you want? Yeah, I want 2 gold coins. Done, 2 gold coins. What's a gold coin? We're talking about 1/10 of an ounce gold coin, or a 1 ounce gold coin. We're talking about one of the 3 ounce gold coins. What kind of gold coin are we talking about? Because there's a world of difference. So the price needs to be specified in transactions as well, as clear as they can get. The time of payment also needs to be specified. So everything needs to be specified properly. So you say, I'm going to pay you in the summer. What summer? What part of the summer are you going to pay me in? When does the summer begin? When do you define what summer is? Right? So it needs to be clear and unambiguous as possible. Okay? Otherwise, that transaction is invalid. So the transaction did not take place otherwise. Right? Selling something which you probably are not certain that you can actually attain it in the first place. So this is rare, but you can apply this analogy to other people. So somebody's selling, say, see that bird flying up there? I'll sell you that bird for $10. You don't possess the bird, first of all. You need to catch it first before you go and start selling it. It's not in your possession. So you say, you know what? See that fish? That fish right there? I'll sell you that for $10. But you don't know if you're going to be able to catch the fish or not in the first place. So you cannot sell something like that because you don't clearly own it, and there's uncertainty in whether or not you can actually procure it or not. So you cannot make that transaction because it's not clear. Another thing is, neither the price nor the item can be determined by chance. And that's similar to what we just talked about. Now this is very common in Muslim communities because they don't know. So you go to a circus or you go to like a fair, right? And they have all those games of chance. Right? All those games of chance. You know what? You take a quarter and you throw it. And if it lands right here, you're going to win this. And if it doesn't land, we just got your quarter. Right? The problem with that is that's a transaction that you're making as well. That type of transaction is not, it's similar to gambling. It's not prohibited because it's gambling. It's prohibited because it's a transaction and the price or the item are not fixed. Right? So they're determined by chance. So it's like you're paying a quarter or you're paying $1, you put it in the machine and you go and try and get the claw and all of that stuff. You're aiming for that and you say, well, we're just trying to have fun. Right? At the same time, from the principal aspect, it's not something that the transaction is allowed in and of itself. Why? Because you're paying for something which you may not get, or you may get something, but that what you're going to get is not specified. So things like this are actually the transaction itself. If we view it as a transaction, it's prohibited from the perspective of being uncertain or having a level of uncertainty. So we need to be careful of that. When the price or the item is going to be determined by chance. By chance, like I'll give an example that they used to do in the olden times, before Islam. In Arabia, what they used to do is they used to say, okay, you know what you're going to do? we're going to give you a stone. Okay, so you take this stone, and there's some garments over there. There's some cloth. There's a silk one, and there's a Yemeni garment, and there's a this garment. What you're going to do is you're going to throw this stone, and whichever one it lands on, you automatically bought that garment for whatever price it is. So you try and go and get the one that's going to be the best price. So you go and you throw the stone. If it lands in the right spot, that's what you just bought. If it lands in the wrong spot, you just bought another garment which you didn't really want. What is unclear? The item is unclear. Right? The item is unclear. So something, whether the price is unclear or the item is unclear, that type of transaction is prohibited. So the games that people play, certain, like you give $1 or something like that, and you say, well, I'm going to throw this thing, and if it lands on this, you win a jackpot. You win some type of lottery or something like that, or you win this type of prize or something like that. If you do, you have these things in carnivals and all that. So if you do something like that, it can fall in the same transaction. In the circus, yeah. So the principle of the transaction itself is prohibited. Okay. Now I'm going to mention to you the exception to the rule. Okay, but the principle is not approved. Okay, all sales should be made according to custom and according to common sense. Okay, so what does that mean? These are all funny examples, but you can imagine how this can become a problem. So somebody sells you a car, and you buy the car for $5,000. You say, thank you very much for the transaction and everything. Exchange the money and everything is good to go. You got the money in your account, so enjoy your car. And then when he's walking, oh, by the way, did you want to buy the keys as well to the car? Well, the keys are cost $5,000 as well. So you already bought the car, but if you want the keys, we didn't agree on the keys. Right? So let's agree on the keys as well. No, this is not allowed. Custom and common sense means that the car comes with the keys, right? And it comes with the tires. You don't say, oh, we sold you the car. Oh, by the way, I got my team over here. They're going to take out all the hubcaps and the rims and the tires and everything. And you can figure out a way to get it back to your home. You can't do that, because according to custom, everything that's included with the item or the product does not need to be declared, as long as it's clearly understood. Okay? But let's say you sold a car, and inside you got an external GPS system, right? For the British students, sat-nav system, right? Sitting there, it's a map system. So it's external, it's sticking there. You just sold the car. And now after you sold the car, you exchange the money and everything, you're going in and you say, okay, well, you know what? Let me just go and grab my, I'm going to grab my wallet and I'm going to grab my satellite navigation. You say, no. Everything that was in the car, yes, including the wallet, is mine now because you didn't take it out. That's part of the transaction. You cannot do that. All right, so everything that's according to custom is generally considered part of the transaction. That's going to be part of the item. That's going to be considered part of the transaction. Everything that's not is not. Right? And if there's a dispute, and it's a clear dispute, whether this should be part of it, let's say there's a boom box in the back, right? And it's got a subwoofer, and the subwoofer is plugged in, right? So you say, well, I'm just unplugging the subwoofer. So no, that's part of the car because it was plugged in. No, I could have just unplugged it like this. I'm taking the subwoofer. So where do? You go to small claims court. That's what you do, right? No, literally, that's what you do. You go to small claims court and you try and resolve this amongst yourself, because a judge needs to decide now. If something could have been this way or that way, a judge needs to decide. But if something's very clear, there's no need for a judge. Okay? If the transaction is performed by the consent of both parties, so if you have a transaction which has an element of uncertainty, right? But both parties are agreeing 100% that we don't have a problem, we don't need to define this much. Right? If both parties agree, then in that case, the transaction takes place according to some scholars. Okay? And according to other scholars, it does not take place. But let's say we take the loosest opinion, the transaction will take place. According to both scholars, then it's allowed. But the stipulation is, either party can cancel as long as the item is in its original condition. So if you want to carry out a transaction which has uncertainty by mutual consent, you get the option to cancel. Okay, so that's why it's coming back to the circus things and all of that. If there's a mutual consent there, it can be done, but there has to be the option to cancel. and there's no option to cancel, generally. So you have to have that potential. So somebody says, well, you know what? Okay, let's go back to the bag of change example. My teacher used to use this one a lot. I find it to be funny. You got a whole bag of change, it's random change. You say, I'm going to trade this bag of change for your bag of dates. Right? So we exchange and you say, okay, we're both agreed. Yes, there's uncertainty. Yes, there's this involved. But we're both fine. I'm perfectly fine with taking the uncertainty. And I'm perfectly fine with taking your dates. We're going to go ahead and exchange. We exchange. You have the right to cancel. So the guy opens up. He looks through. These are all pennies. Right? This is all. There was only a few quarters at the bottom that I saw, and the rest of it was just pennies. I don't want this. There is an automatic right, and that right can be exercised. You have to return back. Okay? So a few clarifications on this slide that were brought to my attention. So we're talking about uncertain transactions. Probably this not would have been better if it was not there. So that if the price or the item is determined by chance, then it is an uncertain transaction. Alright, so so hopefully that makes it clearer. Basically this was like an independent sentence saying the price or the item should not be determined by chance. But if it is determined by chance, then it becomes an uncertain transaction. Okay, so hopefully that clarifies a little bit on that part. Now we move to forbidden transactions. So forbidden transactions are transactions which are not allowed, but they take place. Okay, they actually occur. Right? So they're considered valid. When you say the word valid though, valid does not mean halal. Valid means they occur. So be very careful about the wording here. Okay? So a valid transaction is something that happens, money is exchanged, property is exchanged, but it doesn't mean that it's allowed always. It can still be prohibited. Right? So, what are forbidden transactions? One type of forbidden transaction is when somebody intentionally bids up the price on an item without any intention to purchase the product. So you're at a stall and you're negotiating a price, and you know what, or you're at an auction, for example, right? And somebody's saying, you know what, this tablet is going for $200. And you say, $200, I'm willing to do $200. And another guy comes in, you go, I'll give you $220. And the other guy's, okay, I'll take it for $230 because there's only one left. I'll take it for $230. No, I'll take it for $240. And this guy has no intention whatsoever to buy it at all. He wants you to pay more money. Why would somebody want to do this? Right? Either because they're just a punk like that, or they're in league with the seller. And this is very common. So if you're in league with the seller and the seller hired you or is your friend, and you're like, I can get more money out of this guy because he looks like he really wants to buy it, then you do that in order to get the seller more money. But you had no intention to buy it in the first place. You knew that you were just hoping, and you knew that the guy would keep on bidding up so he'd pay more for the item. This is prohibited in Islam. Okay? And according to the latest eBay rules, it's even prohibited on eBay. Right? You're not allowed to do that anymore, because what people used to do, anyways, it's not important. It's not important. Anyways, people used to bid up their own product. So basically, this is kind of relevant, I know I won't say who used to do it. One of my family members, he used to do this. So so we already clear, yeah. Okay, we already know who it's not my mom. It's not my mom. So somebody's selling something on eBay, and they want to get $100 for it. Or you're selling something in an auction, you want $100. In your mind, you want $100. But you want to attract everyone to start bidding on your product. So you put it for $50. Right? But you're not going to sell this for less than $100. So you come in, everyone looks, wow, $50, I'm going to bid on it. And then someone goes, wow, it's only $60, I'm going to bid on it. And you hope that they keep bidding up and they get up to $100 or more so that you're going to sell the product. What happens if you miscalculate and it only goes up to $80 and then people stop bidding and your auction's about to end and your time is going up? You do what's called, you get one of your friends, or you make your own fake email account, and you do what's called shadow bidding, where you bid on your own product pretending like you want to buy it, so that it gets sold back to you, and it makes it look like that somebody else bought it. This is not allowed on eBay, at least. It's something that should not originally be allowed in Islam, because once you put something on the market at $50, Once you advertise that price, you're going to have to honor that price. Okay? So it's not something that's allowed Islamically, and your eBay account will get cancelled if you try to do it as well. So there's a new policy happened to somebody. Alright, so intentionally bidding on something to raise the price without the intention of actually purchasing it. But if you're bidding it up and you really wanted to buy it, and then afterwards, you're like, that price is too high, that's allowed. Number 2, to outbid the buyer after an agreement has already been made. So this is not only for the buyer, but for the buyer or seller. So 2 people already made an agreement. You say, you know what, I'm going to buy that for $15. And you negotiate the price, and it was originally 25, and the guy went down to 15. So, okay, done. You're taking your money out of your pocket, and then all of a sudden, another guy comes and says, you got it for 15? I'll give you 16 for it. That is not allowed. And the reason why it's not allowed, because once the agreement has been made like that, if the guy, it's not allowed for the buyer to do that anyways, but if he did something like that, or if they're in a negotiation process and it's just about to happen, just about to get concluded, if the guy outbid you on the last second, right, and he was not even your transaction, how would you feel towards him? You would hate that guy, man. He just messed up your whole deal, right? He just messed up everything for you. So in order to prevent that hatred, Islam has prohibited this type of not a transaction, but this type of bidding. This is not allowed in Islam. But if you do it, and the guy says, okay, I'm selling it to this guy now, I don't want to sell it to you anymore. And then after a few minutes, he goes and sells it to the other guy for $16. Is it a valid transaction? Yes. And the guy sold his thing, you gave the $16, you ruined the guy's transaction completely. It's valid, but it's haram, it's prohibited. Right? At minimum disliked, at maximum it's prohibited. This is very similar to an engagement. Scholars always give examples of marriage with the economic transaction. This is like engagement. So if you're engaged to somebody else comes along and proposes while you're engaged. This is not allowed. You're not supposed to do that, because what's going to happen? What is that person going to feel towards you? You just took my guy or you took my girl, right? But if you already proposed and you said you shouldn't have done this, but then the family goes, man, this guy is way better than the first guy. Forget the first guy. We're going with this guy. And then they get married. Is the marriage valid? The marriage is valid. So it's valid, but it's not allowed. You're not supposed to do that in the first place, but it's valid. You can't say it's invalid. The first guy comes back and says, no, she's my wife actually. You weren't allowed to do this. No, it's haram what you did, but it's valid. It counts. Number 3, transactions during Friday prayer. So you're not supposed to be buying and selling anything while the Friday prayer is taking place. And it's disliked to be selling after the Friday prayer is about to start. The adhan has been called and everything like that, the first adhan and all of that. But the prohibition comes when the Friday prayer has started. So while the khutbah is going on, you got some guy who came to, sell his books outside. One of the sellers or something like that. He's selling books or he's selling whatever it is outside. And he sees that before the khutbah, like 5 people are in line. They all want to buy his products. And then he looks at the time, it's 1:05. Adhan has been called, there's still 3 people in line. This is my opportunity to make some money. It's haram for him to go and sell those products. He needs to close up the shop and he needs to walk straight in. Should have done it before, but he needs to walk straight in because he's not allowed to sell during that time. Now, if somebody goes and buys from him and he sells, and then they come 5 minutes late into the Jummah prayer, so what you did is haram. Is it valid or is it not valid? It's valid. So you don't have to return the books, but what he did was prohibited. Right? Some scholars have said it's invalid. Right? So it's best not to do it anyways, but if it was invalid, then that means the transaction didn't count and the person can go back and return their product. Or has to go back and return their product. The last one, and there's many others, but I'm just summarizing these ones. The last one in this category is gambling and zero-sum games. Okay? So, what is gambling? And what is a zero-sum game? Most people understand what gambling is. Most people don't understand what is a zero-sum game. Zero-sum game is so common. So common. People don't even realize it's prohibited in Islam. What a zero-sum game is, you put in certain amount of money, right? And the prize and the reward is going to be exactly equivalent to all the money that was put in. That's a zero-sum game. Okay? So everything that was put in is going to be given and everyone else gets zero. Right? So the entire sum, the prize is the sum of what everyone put in, and everyone else gets zero except for one or two people. Huh? Like a lottery. Like a lottery. Right? So similar to a lottery, but there's different types of gambling as well. Right? So the thing is, we think lottery is gambling. It's very clear. What we don't think is that if somebody comes and says, well, I want to have this raffle drawing, right? And everyone buys one raffle ticket for $1, right? And there's only 20 people. And it's just a small raffle, so we're just going to buy a small, little cake or something like that, and we're going to raffle off the cake. No one views this as gambling. Right? This is a zero-sum game. And it's the same type of form of gambling Islamically, so it's not considered something that's allowed. The reason why it's not allowed is because even though it's on a small level, it's on a small scale, it's something which should not be done. This type of practice should not be done because it's intrinsically bad for the community. It's a principle that you're acting upon, it's bad for the community. So if you say, well, if I lose $1, it's not a big deal. Right? That's the common argument, right? If I lose $1, it's not a big deal. And you say, I'm not going to become a compulsive, addictive gambler. I'm not going to have a gambling addiction or something like that. I just, once in a while I go and buy a raffle ticket or I go buy a lottery ticket or something like that. See, in this society we see the wisdom of why gambling is prohibited because we see how people's lives have been ruined from gambling, right? Islamically, that's one of the wisdoms, but that's not the reason why it's prohibited. And in the next class, next quarter, we'll understand the difference between a reason and a wisdom. Okay? But the reason why it's prohibited is not due to the fact that it's going to cause addiction. The reason it's prohibited due to the fact that the principle is that everyone else is going to lose while only one person is going to win, and it's a game of chance. So it's a type of transaction that's taking place where you have this level of uncertainty that's involved. Right? And the uncertainty can lead to, oh man, I lost my $1 or I wasted my $5. Just imagine that on a larger scale. So you walk into an airport, Dubai airport, and you say, you know what, there's this nice Mercedes sitting there. Or now actually Dubai airport has McLarens, and they have Ferraris sitting over there. And you're just so awed, You say, you know what, all you need to do is you buy one raffle ticket for $100 or for $200 or whatever it is. And if you're only there's only 1,000, 5,000 people or something, whatever the investment is. If you get picked, you get that car. So now, how much are you losing? It's not just $1. Now you're losing $100, or you're losing $1,000 or whatever the raffle ticket costs. So it's the principle. It's like alcohol being prohibited on a small scale, even if you're not getting drunk, as well as on a large scale. Right? So this is what we call gambling and zero-sum game. So it's an uncertain transaction, and on a larger scale, it causes people to lose their wealth, by practicing this principle. So we need to be very careful about gambling. Let me explain this. So the reason why there's a difference between gambling and zero-sum games is because gambling is like chance, right? 100% if you just pick a lottery ticket or you pick a number out of a hat, that's completely random. So somebody says, well, what if there's skill involved? What if we're in a competition, poker competition, right? So we understand when we say poker competition, you say, oh, well, that's poker is gambling, so that's understood. So okay, let's change the game from poker to chess. So now you're in a chess competition. Everyone pays a certain amount of money into the chess competition to enter, and the exact prize is 100% equivalent to everything that everyone paid in. That's exactly the definition of a zero-sum game. There's skill involved. There is skill involved. Gambling, we say there's no skill involved. It's just all random. In poker, there is skill involved. Right? Even on a craps table, for example, I'm not going to get into the details, but there's a way to kind of, put the odds a little bit more in your favor than just being completely random. Right? So these games, blackjack and all of that, there is a level of strategy involved. Chess is pure strategy, but the zero-sum game aspect of it causes it to be prohibited anyways. So if there was an entrance fee for the setup of the competition and all of that, and then the prize is not directly linked to the admission fee, then it's allowed to participate in a competition like that. But if the prize is 100% dependent on the money that you're putting in, and everyone else is going to lose, and you're not paying for the setup and for the referee and for the, all of that stuff, that's not where your money is going to. The money is actually mainly going to the prize itself. This is going to be a zero-sum game, and it's not allowed. Okay? Yeah, chess is okay. If it's a normal competition, yes. Some very nice person goes and says, you know what, whoever wins this chess game, I'm going to give them a prize. That's allowed. You just enter in, you say, let's say we have a chess competition here. And I say, I want to see somebody, whoever wins, I'm going to give them a laptop. That's right, they give money for Quran competition. So it's allowed. It's not based on what you're putting in. That's the thing. So if the Quran competition prize was a Hajj package, and everyone needs to put in 100 contestants, everyone puts in 1/100th of the price of the Hajj package, then it's not allowed anymore. It's not allowed anymore. So this competition is allowed as long as it's not a zero-sum game. No, it's not any competition that you have to pay to enter. It's any competition where the prize exactly equals up all the entrance fees. Or if it's not linked, if it's linked. If it's not linked at all, then it's perfectly fine. So you go and do a tennis tournament, for example, and you say, you know what, to get in the tennis tournament, it costs $50 just to get in. So well, what am I paying for exactly? The prize is like $100 or something like that. What am I paying for? Well, you got referees, and you got association fees, and you got this fee, and you got that fee. So well, where's the money for the prizes coming from? Oh, we have sponsors from Nike, other companies that exploit little children in Thailand and stuff like that. We got all these other companies that are going to be paying for your prize, so it's not coming from you, so it's fine. Like horse racing, no, but that's horse racing is usually gambling. Yeah, that's prohibited. That's because the money you put in is going to the prize, so that's prohibited. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. Interest-based transactions. So the next thing is interest. So most people don't understand what an interest-based transaction is. This is very important too. No. Literally, it used to be called usury, right? Islamically, there is no difference between usury and interest, right? The main difference happened when the church, Catholic Church, used to always say that interest is prohibited. They used to say usury is prohibited, interest is 100% prohibited. When the Christians basically decided to say that we're going to start allowing interest transactions, they came up with a new term, interest. So that interest is different from usury. Usury is a high amount and interest is a low amount. So we're going to allow the low amount, but we're not going to allow the high amount. Whereas traditionally the Catholic Church has always said that all levels of interest, all levels of usury is 100% prohibited. That's why you have these two different words, usury and interest. Islamically, there's no difference between these words. So you use the word usury, use the word interest, they're synonyms completely. Okay, so riba, interest-based transactions, refer to when you get any type of benefit in addition to a price that you're giving. Okay, so we're going to talk about the two types. The first type of transaction of interest is interest through quantitative disparity. Okay, now don't get thrown off by that. This is known as riba al-fadl. Al-fadl. Alright. So basically what this means is there an explanation? No. What this means is if you're trading two things of the same type, okay, and these things are measured or weighed normally, right, with the disparity in them, then it's prohibited for you to do so. So I'll give you an example. I have 10 really good quality dates, and you have 11 inferior quality dates. So I say, you know what? I'll give you my 10 good quality dates for your 11 bad dates. It's the same type of item. They're both dates, right? But there's a disparity in terms of quantity. The quantity is not the same, right? But the type is the same. You're not allowed to do this transaction. Right? To give you a more modern example, okay? I have 5 iPhones. I'm a businessman, I'm selling on Craigslist, I have 5 iPhones, and they're perfect mint condition. And you have 7 iPhones in excellent condition, good condition, but not like my condition. They've got a few scratches on them and everything like that. So I say, I'm going to trade you my 5 phones for your 7 phones. You're not allowed to do that. Now let's talk about why. This is 100% prohibited in Islam. Why is it prohibited in Islam? Because there's a very good chance that one party is being mistreated. One party is being abused because you're trading the same type of product. Now, which party do you think usually gets abused? The one who has the better quality product or the worst quality product? The worst quality product. Because that person who has got like 15 messed up dates, or got 15 smartphones of the same type that are a little bit scratched and everything, they're looking, oh, that's a better quality one, So the person who is in the position of superiority, or the person who is a dominant position, is the guy who's got the perfect quality and say, well, we're not talking about value here. Quality of my phone is great. So they can upgrade the quality of their phone and make it look like, this is, my perfect iPhone, same brand, this iPhone 5, and you have 2 iPhone 5s with scratches on them. Well, my one is worth your 2. So don't you want a brand new one because yours is messed up? You give me both of yours and I'm going to give you one of mine. In reality, that's not a fair transaction, because value-wise, value is way off. But if that person gets lured and say, well, I don't like to have scratches on my phone, I don't like this, I don't like that, that person usually is going to get abused. And sometimes it can be the other way around. So because there's a room for abuse here, Islam has completely prohibited this transaction. Okay? Let's take another example. You have grapes, right? I have grapes and you have raisins. And I say, I'm going to trade you 10 grapes for 15 raisins. Quantity is not the same. The grapes are from the same type, or are they from the same genus as raisins? Yes and no. But they're far enough apart to be considered 2 distinct products. So you're allowed to make that transaction. Okay, so if I have an iPhone 4 and you have iPhone 4S, and we're making the exchange now, they're from different types. They're not really the same genus. So they're far enough apart that you can say, well, maybe the iPhone 4, I'm not sure. But perhaps, let's say it's a smartphone, S4 versus a 4S, for example, and you're making a trade. Something like that. You're allowed to do that in quantitative disparity. Okay? So the reason is because there's so much room for abuse. Okay, that's the reasoning behind it. And then we're going to talk about currency exchange, which comes into the same, let's just talk about that first. So currency exchange is allowed. What if you're exchanging currencies? Are you allowed to trade dollars for pounds and all of that? They're both currencies, but they're different currencies. So are you allowed to make an exchange on the monetary price? The answer is yes, with one condition. And the condition for this, by the way, the fadl, is only if it's done on the spot. Probably should have put that in the notes. It's very important. You can only do this transaction with, let's say, 10 dates for 10 dates, or 10 phones for 10 phones, if it's done on the spot, meaning that the payment cannot be deferred. Now, why is that? Now, what is the wisdom behind that? Most people will think, why would anyone want to do something like this? All right? The reason why is because if you say that there's going to be a deferred payment on these type of products, then there's room for riba. There's room for the second type of riba, where you're going and charging more over a period of time, and you're making it look like we're not really doing that, but in reality you're doing that. So you say, well, I'm going to give you 10 brand new phones for 10 used phones of the same type. You say, okay, well, that's a fair deal, but you know what? You don't even need to pay me right now. You can pay me after a month. Now, the thing is, from the outward perspective, that looks like riba, because you're giving. Why would somebody give new phones for used phones of the exact same type and then give a delay in payment? No one is that foolish to do that. So even if the person says, well, I have a clear intention, my intention has nothing to do with making interest or anything, I just want to help the guy. All right? But the thing is, Islamically, the government has to be able to look at a transaction and rule on it, because it's not about what your intention is, it's what it looks like. Because if you say, well, we have to leave it up to people's intentions, you know what's going to happen? You're going to have half the society who has bad intentions going to be performing interest transactions all over the place in a Muslim society, and the government can't do a thing about it. You say, well, my intention is clean. I'll write a paper for you that says my intention is clean. And you have interest all over your society. So how do you prevent that from happening? You put extra rules in to make sure that nothing that even looks like interest or could potentially become interest from ever taking place. That's the reason for it. So for a lot of people have been confused. I've been confused for 10 years about why in the world would somebody do something like that. So every madhab has a different explanation of the reason why this is. But they all come kind of to this field. They almost come to this area. Okay? So just keep that in mind. So currency exchange is allowed as long as it's on the spot, and the two currencies are of different types. So they have to be of different types as well. So let's say you're trading dollars for pounds or whatever it is. So this used to be more common in the past, where let's say you're going to trade 2 gold coins for 40 silver coins. This is currency for currency. So there is a room for riba, there's a room for interest, but you need to, as long as they're of different types, it's allowed. Right? If it's on the spot and there's no delay in payment. If there was a delay in payment, you say, I'm going to give you 2 gold coins for 40 silver coins, and you could pay me after a month. It's so easy to do an interest transaction out of that. It's a piece of cake. You can devise it in such a way where you just tell the guy, you know what? We're going to calculate it according to this way, this much time, based upon 2 for 40, at this proportion, I'm willing to give you whatever it is, and you can pay me after a month. We write down the contract. It doesn't look like interest, but it is interest. Or it's not interest, but it looks like interest. And then it all depends on the person's intention. So we can't leave it up to somebody's intention. And then if you trade something like a gold ring for a golden necklace, there are 2 different things. A ring, gold ring is made of gold, golden necklace. They're 2 different objects. So you can trade something like that. But you cannot trade a 22 karat gold ring for a 14 karat gold ring. Because this is of the same type, and if it's just pure gold and pure gold, or whatever, not pure gold, but 22 karat gold, 14 karat gold, you cannot trade these 2 things. Because you're trading something that's from the same genus, and there's a room for this type of interest. Okay? So that's the less common form of interest. The most common form of interest is this: interest through deferred payment. Now everyone pretty much understands this principle. Basically, you take an additional price or a benefit for a delay in payment. And this is prohibited. So I go and I say, I'm going to give you $10 today, and tomorrow you're going to give me $11 back. This is interest. If I say, I'm going to give you $10 today, and tomorrow you're going to give me $10 back, and you're going to give me a massage on my shoulders just for 1 minute. That's it. That's the only favor I'm asking you for. This is interest. You cannot take any additional favor for a loan for an extended period of time on the loan that you're giving somebody. Anything, the Prophet peace be upon him said, even if it's a piece of salt, a grain of salt that you receive in addition, that's interest. Doesn't matter how small it is. So if you tell someone, you do this, and you come back, you pay me tomorrow, my only condition is you reserve me a seat tomorrow. That's a favor. And a favor, coupled with that, is interest. Interest basically means you get any type of benefit in addition to the money, the principal that you're getting back, completely prohibited in Islam. Okay, so what is the reason for it? The reason for it is because there's almost no risk of loss when you're loaning out money, unless somebody declares bankruptcy, in this society. In other societies, there's no risk. When you loan somebody money and they can't pay it back, that debt sits there. You can't just file bankruptcy in others. In America, it's very simple. It's very easy to file bankruptcy and all that stuff. In most places, you cannot just file bankruptcy. If you have the money, like in many Muslim countries, if you have the money, what are they going to do to you? They're going to put you in jail until you pay off that debt. So if you go to like Dubai, for example, right? And you go to, I'll give you an example. You go to a dry cleaners in Dubai. Some guy, he gave a check for dry cleaning. 20 bucks, pick up my dry cleaning or something like that. The check bounced. You know what the police does? They go, they put you in jail for a bounced check until you go and you pay that check back. And actually, that's the justice, that's the way it should be. You know what happens in America? You write a $10,000 check and you bounce it, what's going to happen to you? No, nothing, you'll be all right. And then you can go bounce a few more and take some credit card loans and take this loan and take that loan, put it in an offshore account. Hopefully, if the NSA is not monitoring that account, which they probably are, then you're generally going to be fine. And you just declare bankruptcy and you're good to go. You don't go to jail generally, nothing's going to really happen to you if you know your way around the system. You pay for a good lawyer, you're fine. So generally outside of that normal, place which doesn't have all this level, these sophisticated levels, what's going to happen is that person who you owe the money to, they're entitled to that money no matter what. And in traditional societies, even if you die, the debts pass on to your family, and they're responsible for paying that debt. So it just keeps on carrying over. So you've given somebody money, and it's guaranteed, almost guaranteed, that you're going to get the money back. That's why who wins? Who has the upper hand? 100%, it's the person who's giving out the loan. So what this does to society, basically, is that when you have, now who's able to give out loans? It's the wealthy people. People, you have to have money to give out a loan. Right? The person who usually is getting a loan, not a productive loan, but usually it's the person who's in need of money. So you have money, you're wealthy, you're giving out loans to people who need it. That's the best way and the best opportunity to exploit them, right? To charge them interest, and then they're going to have to pay you back. You've taken no risk, and they've taken all the risk. So all the risk, see, the thing is, Islam, when you have a transaction, risk should be shared across the board. Here, all the risk has been transferred onto one side, and the other side has almost no risk whatsoever. This is the problem with interest, so it causes the rich to get richer, causes generally the poor to get poorer, and it's not productive for society as a whole. Why? Because the wealth is not circulating for production. If you give somebody a loan and they're actually doing some business with it, and you have some interest, not the word, different word, interest. You have some care for their success, and their success will determine how much money you get back. That is called productive trade. That's productive for the entire society. So if they're successful, you're successful. But in an interest-based loan, if they fail, you win. If they succeed, you still win. If nothing happens, you still win. No matter what, it's a win-win situation for you. You can't lose. So you don't care if that guy's on the street. You don't care if his business shuts down. You don't care if he loses his house. You don't care if he's, if his family, runs away from somewhere. That's not your problem. But you get your money back. This is the problem with interest transactions. So Islam wanted to prohibit it on the larger scale as well as on the smaller scale. And that's what we can talk more and more about this. This is why all these countries are, you wonder, why is Africa stuck in poverty? Why can't they just get out? Why is South America stuck in poverty? Why can't they just modernize and become more like America, or become like, Switzerland or something like that? It's because they're stuck in debt after debt. They're paying every year interest on all their loans. That's what they're not going to get out. It's not like they can just start from scratch. And if a new leader comes and tries to take over, even if there's a revolution, they still have to pay off their debt. Otherwise, they cannot function in a world economy. So, anyway, it's a problem for society, and that's why Islam has prohibited it. Moving on. Mutual cancelling of the contract. This is known as iqala. So if you make a contract, it's allowed for both parties by mutual consent to cancel the sale, as long as they're both agreeing to it. But the condition is, it has to be cancelled at the original price of the contract. Now I'm going to explain why. The reason why it has to be cancelled at the original price is to prevent abuse from one side, or to add interest by adjusting the rate. So for example, you sell something to somebody, and then you say, okay, you know what, I want to return this phone back. And we didn't make a return policy. So are you willing to can we just cancel this thing? Can I just return this? Just, yeah, no problem, you can return it. But, you can return it, but I'm going to keep 20%. Right? So you're going to sacrifice 20% of the value, and then we can go ahead and return it. So from that perspective, you're not allowed to do that. Why? Because the person is in need right now. Let's say they want to return it. And you're saying, well, I'm willing to go ahead and cancel this contract, but for 20 or 25%, whatever it is. The person is in need, and you're exploiting their need by lowering the amount of money, right? So this is something which Islam does not allow. Okay, so you need to be, if you're a business owner or something like that, and you charge something that's called a restocking fee, there better be some restocking taking place, right? There needs to be some actual, labor involved, or something along those lines when you're doing it. Or, that's if it's not written in the contract. If you write it in the contract, perhaps there could be some leeway for that. But you just need to be very careful that you're not exploiting other people in their weakness. This is something that is to prevent. What do you do if the commodity is lost, the item is lost, right? Then the cancellation will only be in the part that remains. So part of it has been damaged or part of it has been lost, right? You can do cancellation in the part that remains if both sides agree. So this is an exception to the rule. So let's say you buy a box of candy, okay? I couldn't think of a better example. You buy a box of candy and there's like 10 packages inside. You lost half of them, or you ate half of them, right? Now you say, I want to return this back to the owner, but half of it's gone, right? So will you take back these 5 packets of candy proportionate to the original price at 50% of the original price? Are you willing to do that? And it says, if they agree, then it's allowed to do that. If they don't agree and he says, no, actually, because I sold you 10 packets at a discount rate, because you bought 10, 5 packets is not the same price. That's a smaller box that I sell for 5. I cannot give you the same rate. The thing is, that resembles the potential abuse in the first scenario. So it wouldn't be allowed. So it needs to either be at the original price or at the proportionate price for a damaged or lost item. Does that make sense? Inshallah, hopefully it does. Otherwise, just read it again, it'll make sense. Murabaha, cost plus selling, and what's known as tawliya, selling at cost. This is actually very relevant because murabaha, the cost plus, is probably the most common way to buy a house according to the Islamic finance, the modern Islamic finance method. It's called murabaha, which is the cost plus sale. So it's important to understand, first of all, that these type of transactions here, cost plus and selling at cost, were never designed for finance reasons. Finance means when you can't afford something and then you figure out a way to pay it off over time. Cost plus selling originally had nothing to do with finance, right? It was modified and turned into a finance instrument. So if you understand what it used to be, it'll help you to understand later on what it became, right? And I'm not taking an opinion on whether it's right or wrong. I'm just telling you, you need to understand the context. So what is cost plus? Cost plus, known as murabaha, means that you're allowed to sell something when you declare what its cost is. You tell people what is the cost. So you say, you know what, I'm selling this phone at my cost plus 10%. So you know that, if I don't tell you that, and I say, I'm selling this phone for $100, you don't know how much I bought it for. In your mind, you might think, hey, maybe he bought it for $50. He's making, 100% profit. Maybe he bought it for $75. Whatever. It could be anything, right? Maybe I bought it for $99. I'm making only $1 profit. You don't know, and you may never know. But why would somebody want to sell cost plus? Because it's very attractive to the buyer. So you say, you know what? Whatever I sell, I'm going to sell you my phone. I'm going to sell you this. I'm going to sell you my tablet. My price is 5% of my cost. 5% plus my cost. So whatever I invested in and I bought it for and everything, I'm only making 5% on it. So the person says, I want to go and buy from that person because I know that he's, being extra fair. It's a really good deal. He's not going to overcharge me, and I can't go and find this for somewhere else. He himself bought it for this much. So it's a very good way to sell, right? So this is allowed, but you have to have some conditions. There's 2 conditions, or 1 condition and 1 stipulation. The condition is the item has to be fungible. Okay? A fungible item, anyone know what a fungible item is? Anyone economics major here? You're looking at the notes. Yes, that's right. An item that's easily replaceable in the sense that a fungible item means that there's so many of them. It's not a unique item. So let's say a smartphone, right? That company made 1,000,000 of them. They made 50 of them, right? 100 of them. It's easy to replace. You could go buy another one. It's the same thing. But if you go and say, well, this is the sword that belonged to the Ottoman military commander or something like that. There's only one of them. So it's not a fungible item. You cannot sell at cost plus. So the cost plus only applies to an item that is fungible, meaning it's easily replaceable because there's so many of them. The reason for it is to prevent deception from taking place. Okay, so you can figure out why that is. It's allowed to add in the price of the delivery, the price of cleaning the product, the price of your overhead cost and everything when you're saying the cost. As long as you use the right wording and you say, this item cost me $100. Actually, you bought it for $80. You cleaned it up. It cost you $10 to clean it. You paid $7 for shipping, and you paid $3 for your gas money to go and drive over there and drive back. Your cost was whatever I said, $100 or something? Yeah, $100, right? If you say, I bought it for $100, then you're lying. Because you didn't buy it for $100, but your cost was $100. And no one has the right to ask you what you bought it for, because you calculate all in the cost, and it's allowed to do that. So you're allowed to do that, and you're allowed to calculate the overhead and this, and employee salaries and everything, when you're determining what your cost is. The reason why this is important, if the buyer discovers that the seller has deceived him, then he's allowed to reduce the price. So if you find out that the real cost of this thing was not $100, it was $90. The person who's buying it, if he finds out 100% for sure, you're allowed to reduce to $90. And if you go to a court, the judge will decree the transaction took place because you claimed to sell it at cost, and now you give him $10 back because you deceived him. That's the whole point of talking about all this, cost sale. So whether you're selling at cost plus profit, or you're selling just at cost because you just want to get rid of the product, if somebody deceived you, you're allowed to make a reduction in the price. Okay, so that's what cost plus and all of that is. So we will stop here then, inshallah. Take questions. All right. So if you have an item and you know that people are willing to pay a lot more money for it, and you're going to make a lot of profit, as long as it's not an essential item that somebody needs, like food or water or electricity or something like that, then you're allowed to sell it for whatever you want. As long as it's not an essential item. Otherwise, if you buy up all the essential items and you drive up the price and make everyone pay excessive amount for food and bread and all of that stuff, this is not allowed because people need that. So you're not allowed to do that. But if it's the normal item, yeah, the sword of the Ottoman, guy who opened up Constantinople, you can sell it for $1 million, whatever you want. So if the late fee is not stipulated and not connected to an increase over time, right? So there's nothing to do with if you don't pay this, then it's going to go up, and you don't pay this, it's going to go. It's not going to be incremental. Number one, and the late fee is mainly to avert people, to stop people from doing late payment. Then a late fee could be allowed. Okay, so as long as it's done, the normal type of late fee is generally allowed, like a library, right? Library, you're not returning the book in time. Yes, you can charge a late fee. Right, but if you're going to keep on bringing the late fee up and trying to charge them more and more over time, then yeah, that's not going to be allowed. So one type of late fee should be there. Yeah. So if you have a job serving alcohol or something like that, and you can find another job, you have to find another job. You have to. If you cannot find any other job and you need the money, then you can do that temporarily until you find another job. Temporarily, if you need the money, then it's okay for that period of time because you need the money. So you're allowed to do that for a small period of time as an exception to the rule. But the moment you can find another job, you have to go find another job. So let's say your parents are very wealthy and you're going to go get a summer job in a restaurant and you have to serve alcohol. You're not allowed to take that job because you're not in need of money. But if you're in need of money and you don't have any other job, you can take that job until you find another job and you keep searching for another job. The moment you find another job, you go and you take the other job. So you're asking whether or not they can change into dollars? Oh yeah, no, of course, they can keep it. That's fine. Yeah, they can keep it. It's halal to keep a currency knowing that it's going to be fluctuating. That's just the way it is, yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's right. So interest is prohibited in terms of giving, in terms of taking, in terms of witnessing and writing down. And the good point that she brought up is that there is no other place in the Quran that Allah actually says He's declaring war. Allah and His Messenger declare war against the person who's getting involved in interest. So it's a very, very major sin, something that we should avoid. So there is no other place in the Quran where that's mentioned. Yes, it is. So even if the second guy is more religious and a better guy for engagement, it's still haram because they've already made that agreement between themselves. So what's the reason why it's haram? It's not haram because of the person who's getting married. It's haram because of the other guy who's going to get kicked out. What's going to happen between him and his friend who just proposed? They're not going to be friends anymore. So to prevent that from happening, this guy should have gotten in there first. So he missed the opportunity. You shouldn't break up a friendship due to that. Yeah, if they're proposing together or they've not made an agreement. So you go and you meet that girl one day, and then you go and you meet the other girl. You go and meet this guy, and the next day you meet this guy. That's perfectly fine. Until there's been like an agreement. And that's very culturally defined. Once you start setting the date for the marriage and everything, and then this guy comes and says, hey, would you like to meet with me too? Then you have a problem. So here's the thing. I like the way you worded the question. So let's say somebody needs money to invest in something, right? Someone who doesn't have money doesn't need to invest because they don't have any money to invest. So when you need money to pay off something. You want money to invest in something else. There's a difference between need and want. So when you need money, you need a loan, usually there's somebody who can give you some type of loan or something like that, or you can even receive zakah if you're in that type of condition. Or even you can receive a loan from zakah or something like that. But generally, if you're really in need, you can receive zakah money. If you want to invest in something, then the general, normal human principle in life is what? You buy what you can afford. The general American Western principle today is what? You buy everything. Right? You buy everything. So that's what it is. You're buying normal shares in the stock market of a normal company that's dealing in halal transactions and everything like that, and there's no direct interest involved in terms of the majority of their income is from either interest or tobacco or alcohol or pornography. It's perfectly fine to own stocks. Yes, yeah. So you want to invest in Apple computers, for example, it's perfectly fine to buy that. All right. But after the 5C was released, I wouldn't buy Apple right now. But other than that, yeah. You cannot accept the gift if they owe you money directly for that transaction. So after the transaction is done and it's over and everything, then they give you a gift not related to the transaction, then it's fine. So try to keep it as separated as you possibly can. It all depends what you're selling. So if you sell something you don't own, you have to figure out it depends what you're selling. So the transaction is invalid, so either they take their money back, they're going to take their money back for the most part. Because they have to give the product back. So can inflation be taken into account when paying back a loan? That's a question. And it's a very important question. It's a very popular question. I'm going to give you the 3 opinions that are there. Okay? The first opinion is no. Because money is money, and that's a form of interest. So if you give somebody $1,000, and they're going to pay you back in 10 years, and inflation is 2% per year, you cannot purchase with that $10,000 after 20 years or after 10 years what you would have been able to purchase when you gave the money out. So can they give you the extra 20% based upon the inflation rate? The first answer is no, because that's a form of interest. The second answer is, if you're going to do something like that, what you do is you calculate the gold value of the money in that time, in your time, and in that time. Because gold is supposed to be a fixed currency across the world and everything. So you calculate the gold value and they pay you back in the gold value. It's option number 2. Option number 3, which I lean towards, but I don't take this opinion openly, because very few people have this opinion right now, is that the problem in currency, inflation is just something which exists. Secondly, the problem is it cannot be 100% measured either. So there's a problem with that. That's the first opinion. The second opinion is, if gold fluctuates At such a level, you can loan somebody $10,000, and if gold drops 50%, they're going to pay you back $5,000. That makes no sense. That's even worse for you, right? So the thing is, because gold is also now something which is not fixed and also something which is inflated, it doesn't make sense to stick with the gold value, because the argument is gold has intrinsic value. And the counter argument is not in today's world. Because you're going back and you're weighing the gold with the currency which doesn't have real value. So it's not the gold that's the problem, it's the currency attached to the gold that's the problem. So I lean towards a potential for a long-term loan if there's a way to precisely measure exactly what the inflation rate is in one particular area, then perhaps there could be some leeway on that. But it's not something that's firm and fixed. Because it's so difficult to measure, because you have state inflation, you have country inflation, different cities have different inflation, the milk prices differ depending on the city and the availability and all that. So measuring inflation is actually very difficult. So we had a seminar with 3 finance experts, actually very recently. And this was one of the things that we were debating and discussing and trying to come up with something. And we couldn't come up with something firm. But we know that it's a problem and it needs to be addressed. Don't have the exact answer yet, inshallah. But good question. On Islamic finance, you send an email to to AMJA, American Muslim Jurist Association. There would be one good person you can send it to, one good option you can send it to, and they can explain it to you. AMJA, AMJA, online.org. AMJAonline.org. AMJA. There's 2 Jummahs at the masjid. So the one that you're selling at, the one that you're supposed to be praying, the one that you're going to pray at, that's the one you shouldn't be selling at. The one that you're planning on praying, you should be praying. Next question. Okay. Same amount or different amount? As long as it's different. So if you say, I'm going to loan you $100 and you pay me back in pounds. So it's a different currency then. You're paying $100 to somebody who's in India, okay? He agreed he's going to pay you back in dollars. Yeah, that's the way it should be. That's the way it should be, essentially. Yeah. If it's different, it should match. It should be matching to the value of the other currency. It should match. So $100 of rupees, for example, whatever it is, you match it. Match the value. To be equivalent value. Equivalent to the value of what the $100 was. Yeah, so that's the question that she asked. So that's the variable. And what I'm saying is that's the same issue. So when you gave and the currency, now you're paying back in a different currency and the currency has changed, it's the same problem like this one. Because currencies are changing due to partly inflation rate and different values and everything. So it's the same 3 different opinions. There's the 3 opinions, that's what I'm saying. There's the 3 opinions. And I don't have a specific answer. Either same or gold value or adjusted rate. Adjusted rate would mean the new rate, non-adjusted rate would mean the original rate. The transaction itself is allowed if they don't list the price on the item. Okay? But when you go to buy it, they're going to tell you the price before you buy it. So from your perspective, there's no uncertainty. If they increase the price on you because you look a little bit that's wrong of them to do that. So if they're not listing the price, you can't have the consumer protection. In those places where, if you're shopping in a place that's not going to list the price, they can vary the prices. You just need to be more wise. You need to negotiate the price. You need to know how much you're willing to pay. Not necessarily what other people are willing to pay. This is a common problem. And there's no way out of this. Because like if you go in Egypt and you get a taxi and stuff like that, one guy's going to charge you 10 guinea, another guy's going to charge you 50 guinea for the same ride. And then the next person who comes in is going to charge them 10, and you can charge them 50, depending on what they're wearing and depending on how their accent is. Islamically, they're not required to list the price, but Islamically, they're required to not rip you off either. That's the whole thing. Right? So they're not supposed to rip you off, but they don't necessarily have to list the price. The reason is, it would be too much of a burden to list the price all the time. You say, okay, from this hotel to the haram in Mecca is going to cost this much. And from this part of the city to this place, depending on traffic, is going to be this much. And if traffic becomes this much, then we're going to list this much. Most taxi drivers in the world, for example, they wouldn't even be able to come up with those calculations. They just come up with like random figures from their head. So the thing is, it would make it too difficult for them to specify at that level. That's why. So Islam didn't impose that. Although if they did, it would have been great. That's why before you drive, let's say you're in a taxi, or before you buy or something, you try and find out, say, you know what, how much is your price of this and this and this? You go and you ask somebody else, how much is your price? How much did you pay for something like this? You try and figure out what the real price should be so they don't rip you off. Take the white taxi, you're going to get ripped off more. You take the bus in Egypt. If you just know the local language, then you don't get ripped off. I can pass as the Egyptian if I wear the right clothing. So. All right, khair, inshallah. So, any other questions? Just text me, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.